Hi, and welcome back to the Sibme Coach Replay. I'm your host, Cory, and today we have back Melody Deemer. She talked with us a little bit earlier this year about some ways that we can support psychological safety with teachers, strong starts to our classrooms. She's back today to talk with us a little bit about more teacher-focused move that we can implement in our classroom. So Melody, she's one of our Sibme virtual coaches. She's one of our top coaches, and she's also a fifth grade teacher, and she's thinking about the teaching procedures as she begins her 35th year in the classroom. So welcome back, Melody.
Cory, thank you so much. Happy New Year. I'm excited about starting another year. Isn't it great that teachers get to start over again every year?
I know, right? Yes. Start of the school year was always super exciting. I always had these horrible nightmares, though. Not that I would forget my locker combination, but I would forget I'd go into the wrong classroom or I'd forget my students' names. So
right.
That anxiety plus the excitement of a new year. So.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm excited. We're talking again about a little bit of classroom management, which we do a lot with you in the Sibme Coach Replay Show, and I think it's great. And today we're specifically going to be talking about teaching routines and procedures, and I'm passionate about this. You and I have talked a little bit off screen about my background in explicit instruction and that aha moment that I had as a teacher when I realized that I needed to do more than just say, here's our routines and procedures, here's how we do it. I actually had to teach them. You know, it's a little behavioral psychology, which I geek out on as a psychology major. So let's talk about it. So classroom management. We know that so much of what effective classroom management is about those effective routines and procedures. Do we really have to teach them, Melody?
Boy, I'll tell you what, we really do. And it took me a long time in my career to really wrap my head around that, because I used to, at the beginning of the year, I would tell kids what I wanted them to do, and I would think that would be sufficient. So, for example, if we were going to lunch, I'd say, all right, everybody, on the first day, you're going to line up for lunch. You're going to line up in single file. Don't talk. Here we go. And we go out the door, and that might be okay for a day or two, but really by like the second week, they'd be walking down the hall in a clump, chattering away. And I would think, I was clear. I think I was clear. I said, don't talk. And I said, walk in single file. Like, why is that hard? So now I've really come to realize that there's a lot more involved in teaching procedures than just, that kind of comment that you make and you think it's one and done.
Yeah, or having the poster up on your wall. One of the things that when I train on routines and procedures and classroom management, I help teachers understand that the longer our students are in school, the longer that they're in the classrooms, the more classrooms, the more routines and procedures they've been exposed to. It doesn't exactly make them masters of it, because what on time and be prepared and quiet looks like in my classroom might be very different than what it looks like in your classroom. In fact, I remember in high school, I knew which classrooms I just needed a big toe in the threshold of the door before I was counted tardy. And I know which ones I actually had to be in the seat and working.
Right.
It's not just to be just sliding in the doorway when that bell rings. And that makes a difference. You think about when you walk into someone's home for the first time. It's an unwritten norm, an unspoken norm to take off your shoes in most households. It's just something you expect. But if you don't take your shoes off in a household that's expected, you kind of get the side glance or bless your heart back and down in Texas. So yeah, we really do have to teach them what that rule or that routine means to us in our classroom.
Absolutely.
So how do you teach routines differently now that you've kind of realized that for yourself?
Well, I start by trying to lay some background work. So I talk to kids about how, we've got 25 or 30 people in the room. And so we need some routines, we need some procedures just to make sure that life runs smoothly and that everyone is treated fairly. So I try to frame it in a positive light. And then I go on to say, because I teach 5th grade, and they are sometimes worried about getting in trouble, as they like to say. And I say, look, we're going to really learn these procedures and routines so you never have to worry about getting in trouble, because you're going to know exactly what to do. So it really reduces some of that beginning of the year anxiety that kids can come in with. And then I also explain the reasoning behind each one of the routines, so they don't feel like, they're in this class and I'm the dictator and they're going to do what I say or else. Like, I don't want that kind of feeling. I want it to be, listen, we're going to do it this way because if we don't go down the hall quietly, it really bugs other classes, and you're at the top of the school now and you don't want to be doing that. You want to set a great example for those younger kids, like that kind of talk, so that they have a reason to buy into what it is I'm trying to teach them.
I love that. I love that positive framing for the students. And something that you mentioned off screen as we were getting ready for this episode was that you had to give yourself permission to first do this, right?
Right. Yeah, and that's difficult because I don't know about other schools, but I can tell you in my county, which is how Maryland does school districts, that there is a lot of pressure to get to that curriculum and get there fast and make sure that everything we want you to cover in the school year, make sure that you've done all that. So there's a lot of pressure to get there quickly, and you have to really sort of resist that and say, I promise you I will do everything you want me to do, but first I'm going to teach my students these procedures and routines.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you can't, as you're teaching them some of those things, like how we transition from seat work to small group work, or when we come in the classroom, you can't have them start to engage in some getting to know you activities, some pre-assessment activities where you're kind of seeing where their writing skills are, their reading ability, their math abilities are. So you can hit the ground running when you're ready. But you're right, you do have to give yourself permission in those first 2 weeks. That's what those first 2 weeks are. They're about building rapport with our students, getting our classroom ready so we can go as fast as we can once we're ready. Because if not, we're going to be stopping constantly to address classroom management. So
exactly.
You start with positive framing, and you talk a little bit about those consequences for some of those routines. So what about the actual teaching part of your routine procedures?
So I try to, you mentioned the consequences, and I do make that explicit for kids so that they understand what the consequences will be, but I don't dwell on that. I make that part as brief as possible because they'll hear me say it once, and that part isn't very, it doesn't have much of an impact on them really. What has the impact is if they transgress after they have thoroughly learned that routine and that consequence is applied. That's where they say to themselves, oh yes, I see, it makes sense now. So I don't spend a lot of time talking about consequences, but I do like to go right to some direct instruction about a routine. So sticking with talking about the lunch routine, now what I do is post a visual, some kind of an anchor chart, like these are the steps that we're going to go through. And the way that I do it is that I give kids a number in alphabetical order, and they line up in number order, and then the next day the person in the front goes to the rear of the line, so everyone is, eventually has a chance of leading the line down the hallway, getting to lunch first. But so we have to practice all those things. So I'll say, okay, let's line up in line order, and we're not talking. Do that now. So they'll do that, and then if someone doesn't do it correctly, I run on the assumption that they didn't understand, they forgot, their mind had wandered when I gave the direction, and so I give a gentle correction. No, remember, and point to that anchor chart and correct that right there without any consequence, because I'm assuming that they want to do what I want them to do. They just messed up. So then, the next step might be, okay, we're going to walk down the hall in single file, and we're not going to talk. So let's step out into the hallway and do that. And we practice doing that. And again, I make a correction if it's needed. So then I wrap that up. And then before we actually go to lunch, I'll do a quick review. I'll point to that anchor chart again and say, remember, we practiced this morning. Here's how we're doing things. So let's go ahead and give it our best shot. So doing it that way, kids are much more likely to comply, and there's consequences sometimes come in when they need to be, but if they're given in a quiet way, in a just kind of a fair, low-key kind of way, I find that to be really effective.
Yeah, definitely. And it's just a step to help them be successful in the way that you need them to behave, right? So I see a successful or well-ordered classroom in this way, so I'm going to teach you how that looks, so then we can all be successful in doing that together. It sounds like it's a lot of work for just one procedure in your example. That's a lot of work. Is it worth it?
It's totally worth it. In a number of different ways. So first of all, it saves a lot of time because you're not having to stop and scold and now we're gonna do this right, and it's like all of that falls by the wayside as the year goes on, because that routine becomes habit, and with just a little bit of touch up now and then, it pretty much runs itself. And the other thing that I really think is important is that it sets a tone of kind of peaceful, orderly, calm behavior when you're in school. Like, we're here to learn, and that's what's important, and we're gonna conduct ourselves in a certain way. Because I found that if kids are jostling each other and carrying on in the hallway, that's going to come into the classroom, and then you lose the first 5 or 10 minutes getting everybody settled down. So this kind of solves that problem.
Yeah, definitely. So then once it's taught, once you've kind of gone through that, everyone has experienced success consistently, does it just run automatically after that?
Well, you still have to put some effort into it. So especially in the first couple weeks of school, or on a Monday, or after a long holiday, I'll point to that anchor chart again and say, I just want to review before we step out of the room how we're doing this. And if you do that with those little touch-ups, those little kind of brush-ups when they're needed, as I said, it becomes a habit and saves you a lot of time.
Yeah, definitely. So one final question, just kind of bringing this back into the coaching world for us, Melody. If I've got a teacher who, it's the first few weeks of school, and either they've asked for some support around establishing routines and procedures, or maybe from last year, or you can kind of tell that they might need some support, what's the best thing that we as coaches can do to help do this? I get asked a lot when it comes to classroom management, should the coach step in and model that for classroom management or behavior expectations? What's your thoughts on that? And what's something that a coach could do to help a teacher looking to implement this?
I think it might be a good idea before you get to the point where, things are falling apart. Hopefully before the kids come in even, to say, you know what, I've been thinking about routines, and here's the way I'm thinking of doing this year. Could you take a look and give me your thoughts on this? So that you're showing the teacher a model and giving her a chance to reflect and respond to it. And again, we talked in an earlier session about relating to the people that you're coaching in a respectful way. So it's a way of saying, this is a concern for me as a teacher. Is it a concern for you also? Here's how I'm thinking of addressing it. Could you give me some feedback on my ideas? What do you think?
Yeah, it's a great way to kind of plant that seed, especially if you're not sure if that insight or that example might be warranted from that person. So I think that's a great way to pull that into that. Well, thanks for joining us again, Melody. I enjoyed this topic a lot because I really do. It makes all the difference. It's the secret sauce, I think, to classroom management is teaching routines and expectations, modeling those, having students practice that, going through the work of reinforcing it, and understanding that you'll have to do a little reteach around Halloween and Christmas and pep rally days, but you know what?
Right.
It makes a difference. It really does. So
it does indeed. Well, thank you so much, Cory.
All right, y'all, tune in next week for another episode of the Sibme Coach Replay.